And then it's time for a criminal investigation into you-know-who, the disgraced, twice impeached ex-president Donald J. Trump. Let's bring into our conversation Dan Goldman. He served as lead counsel for the Democrats during Trump's first impeachment, as well as a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. Lucky for us, he's currently an MSNBC legal analyst. I have thought so much about the two impeachments. I covered them, as you know, all day, both of them, for their entireties. And I've spent a lot of time wondering if John Bolton had come and testified in full view of all the Republican members of the Senate, if the first impeachment might have ended differently, that you led as lead counsel. And I've wondered, reading about the 7 hours of testimony that Mr. Rosen gave on Saturday to the Senate Judiciary Committee, if the second impeachment might have ended differently. But the truth is, Donald Trump was impeached, and there were bipartisan votes for conviction in both cases, but they came up short. You come at this at a different sort of viewpoint as a prosecutor, and you think it's time for a criminal investigation and possibly prosecution of him. Explain.
Well, I think it's essential to do both. I think Congress needs to take a very close look at what happened, because Congress can and should pass laws that provide narrower guardrails on our elected officials so that this can't happen again. That's part of the reason why the two voting rights laws are so important, to make sure that there isn't voter suppression. And not only that, that elected officials are not empowered to overturn the will of the people. That's one thing. But there are many. Adam Schiff has a Protect Democracy Act, which has a lot of reforms in the post-Trump world. But none of them those reforms go to what occurred on January 6th. And perhaps even more importantly, what occurred in the lead up to January 6th. So it's not an either or. It's that both need to happen. But what is becoming clear is that Donald Trump was not on the outside looking in while some domestic violent extremists who supported him were concocting this plan to raid the Capitol. No, he was at the front of this push and this effort to reverse the election results. And what we're starting to see is the drip, drip, drip of all of his efforts to do it. And in particular, and perhaps most egregious to date, because we will find more, but to date, is what he tried to do with the Department of Justice, which was to take an independent agency, traditionally independent, and use it as his political legal arm to undermine the confidence in the election, so that he, knowing, of course, that there was no truth to it, but so that he could use it for corrupt purposes. That requires a deeper criminal investigation into not only Donald Trump, but all those under him. It's not enough to go after the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, and other domestic violent extremists, which is where the January 6th criminal investigation has focused. It must continue until it determines what the root causes of January 6th were as well.
Do we know that it isn't happening?
No, it very well could be. And it probably is. I would assume it is. And a lot of these revelations have come very recently, in part because the Department of Justice determined that Jeffrey Rosen and 5 others were not bound by limitations of executive privilege, so they could testify. So that's all happened within the last 2 weeks. So it's quite possible that the criminal investigation does include this. I would caution, though, that if I were a prosecutor, I would not be thrilled for a witness, a key witness, to be providing testimony to multiple other agencies or departments, such as the Department of Justice IG's office or the Senate Judiciary Committee. Not that he can't, but it's just from a prosecutor's standpoint, you don't want to have so many inconsistent statements that are bound to occur when you have multiple times testifying under oath or not. But, perhaps this is a bigger issue, and the Senate Judiciary needs to hear from him. The Department of Justice needs to analyze its own regulations and how its own employees behave. But it's entirely possible that it's ongoing and we just don't know about it. That would be the usual course, of course, but in this day and age of leaks, such as the confidential IG investigation, and we know that Rosen spoke to the IG's office, which should be kept confidential. The fact that we don't know that it's part of the criminal investigation is a little bit concerning for those who believe there should be a criminal investigation.
So you have done this. Lisa Monaco has done this, the Deputy Attorney General, and correct me if I'm wrong, but all investigations are sort of housed under her, right? Is that the way it works?
Yes, she oversees the day-to-day operations of the Department of Justice.
So an office like the one you worked in, SDNY, we think it would be more likely that the Washington office would be doing this investigation. Let's take it from the other side, Dan Goldman. How could they not now be? I mean, if they're following the evidence, if a federal investigation just follows the evidentiary sort of guidelines and takes a criminal investigation where it leads, we've seen the defendants say they were there because Donald Trump told them to go there. The ones who assaulted police said they were there because Trump invited them there and the police officers were in their way. I mean, how take it from the other, how could they not have followed that evidence to Donald Trump's doorstep?
Well, a lot of it is perception, and what Donald Trump's intent was is different. Well, I shouldn't say is different, but could be different from how someone else interprets what he was doing. It's a high bar to prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt with admissible evidence. His statements on January 6th certainly help, but the types of efforts to coerce Department of Justice officials in advance of January 6th reveal a lot about his intent. And so that type of evidence now starts to move this investigation from a focus on domestic violent extremism, which, if we're going to get technical with the Department of Justice, would be housed under the National Security Division. A public corruption investigation, a criminal investigation, would be housed under a different division of the Department of Justice, which is the criminal division. And so at some point, the public integrity section within the criminal division will need to pair up with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., which is running the January 6th investigation, because at some point this goes beyond national security issues, domestic violent extremism, and it goes into public corruption and efforts to incite an insurrection and potentially, and most seriously, seditious conspiracy.
So I have one more question about intent, because we were, the proverbial sort of dog chasing his tail in trying to understand why Robert Mueller never interviewed Donald Trump, but then explaining that Robert Mueller could never prove intent because he didn't interview Donald Trump, but he never asked for an interview with Donald Trump. So we never understood really why they couldn't answer the question of intent, but it was never clear they sought an interview to understand his intent. In this case, it seems that what is coming out is clear intent. Just declare the election corrupt and leave the rest to me and our congressman. You got the whole tape, an hour and 30 minutes with Raffensperger, where he tells him to find 11,780 votes. And there's still evidence emerging about contacts with other state election officials. The intent is staring all of us in the face, isn't it?
Well, that's how an ordinary prosecution would prove intent. It's not usually through interviewing a witness or putting them in the grand jury. It is usually based on statements made by the defendant to other witnesses, which are admissible in court. And what we're learning over these last couple of weeks is remarkable. We have that recording, but a little, and you identified this last week, Nicole, a little recognized little tidbit from the Washington Post is that Donald Trump called over to the Department of Justice nearly every day toward the end of December and early January. So we're aware of the notes that Richard Donahue took of one conversation, but we don't know everything that Donald Trump was doing himself. We don't know what conversations Mark Meadows was having at the behest of Donald Trump. So there's a lot that we don't know that would likely be helpful to prove intent. And that's the traditional way of proving intent. It's not through grand jury testimony or the prosecutor interviewing the defendant. It is from statements made by the putative defendant to other witnesses who would testify to them.
And just the final thought, I mean, we know Bill, whatever his intent was, it was too much for Bill Barr, and he left. So we don't have any of his notes. Yeah.
Jeffrey Rosen would have been in meetings that Bill Barr had with Donald Trump. He was the deputy attorney general at the time.